So before we start, do you have any questions for me, maybe?
No, not really. I think I've been doing a good job, and you've got to talk to us people, and I hope you are getting people's attention to watch this because it's a lot of effort.
Yeah. But I'm inspired by people like you, and it's people like you, and as I told you, Diane Ravitch and Andy Hargreaves, who take the time and effort to talk to me. That makes me want to do a better job every time.
Yeah, yeah.
So let us start with the first question. And the first question is American education. It has really my interest because many fads and hypes and theories um, enter Dutch education from the United States. But some people, like Diane Ravitch, told me that education is not as good as it could be. So I'm really curious. What's your view on American education? How are the United States doing at the moment?
Well, I think not well. I think I agree with Diane. The American education could do a lot more, could do a lot better. I mean, it did actually have some good foundations. I think the it just got worse. Actually, it's because of misguided belief about education outcomes and misinterpretation of what education can mean. And I blame that on a bunch of people who do not really understand education, who do not understand what matters in a society. I think they've been going after the uh, wrong outcomes. So it's like standardized test scores, for example, and they really were driven by test scores, and they also driven by the belief that they can fix people's problems, fix social problems. American education really has two big issues. One is the equity problem,
Mhm.
and that is a more of a result of inequity social resources. The society is so very unequal, and then the second one is that the social problem is blamed on education, so therefore it's misdirected in that regard. So right now, I don't think American education is doing well. Actually, it's getting worse. It has been getting worse over the last few decades.
One of the things Pasi Salberg told me is that the success of the Finnish system, for example, is the holistic approach. It's not only about education and what's been happening a lot in more countries than just the US is that people are trying to fix social problems, societal problems by just fixing education, but it just doesn't work that way. So,
Oh, definitely, I agree with Pasi. Yes.
so what larger problems do you see around education that cause these problems?
Well, I mean, this is actually true not only in the U.S. is everywhere because you have social. First of all, the social inequity definitely affects education quality that each individual students receive. I mean, there's traditional historical segregation in this country. Among racial lines, and now certain segregation among income lines have definitely impact on students. We all know that children's family socioeconomic background affects their achievement, affects their experiences. I think that's a large issue. And but schools, can do something, but schools cannot solve all the problems. I think that's what you're expecting schools to fix the social problems, but schools typically perpetuate the social structure and social conditions. So I
Mhm.
think it's just not recognizing the roots of the so-called schooling problem is a denial of any possibility to find any solution.
I've by now talked to many people from the scholars from the United States, and it surprises me so much that so many great scholars like you, like Diane Ravitch, Michael Fullan, Andy Hargreaves, Edie Hirsch. I mean, I could go on for a while, and yet all the research that was generated hasn't added to a solution. How come?
Well, I think it's the same reason because we are educational people, and but a lot of people are not in the policymakers, are not necessarily in education, and they're perhaps driven by other reasons. But another fact is that education people, no matter how good ideas you have, you can only influence what happens in schools. And but in outside school factors, we have very little impact on that. But also more importantly, I think it's in any given society, especially in a big country like US, diverse country like US, um, factors, working against good education ideas, there are too many. I think that's the issue. But also at the same time, I think, don't get me wrong, if you look at pockets of US education, some of them are doing great. They're just not evenly distributed. And that's, so, like the ideas, you imagine, US 300 million people, that's how many Finland. And you probably could find the places of Finland size of 5 million people.
Hmm.
There maybe if you add together, I bet you find enough places that have that kind of achievement and that kind of learning.
So you say a lot of people a lot of decision making is done by people who are not, who don't have an educational background. Places like Singapore and places like Finland, I mean, it's a requirement if you want to become a policymaker that you have an educational background. Would that be, in fact, a solution for the United States? Would it improve education, or is there no correlation whatsoever?
Well, I think the idea is that depends on how you run this. Is the first of all is that America is I think it's a different context. Any society has its own way of governing. I think education is it, it needs requires expertise. It's a professional thing. I think it would be benefit from people who understand education. But in general, in any democracy, true democracy, you do have a lot of people. They want to govern. I mean, American judicial system. A lot of the jurors, they are not really experts, legal experts, but that seems to be okay. Common sense seems to
Hmm.
be okay. And but policymakers, they can always be informed of by educational, experts. But there's another point. I think it's not necessarily about the understanding. It is also about the infights among education people, because there's plenty of people. Don't get me wrong. That they have money. They have a lot of think tanks. They are supporting another type of educational view, another different kind of view that's also happening too. So there are divisions among educators who have different views of what education should be and what education can be. And you look at, let's say, take a look at PISA, OECD. That's a big problem. They have a lot of money to promote one type of view of education, and that's affecting supranationally, affecting the Netherlands, affecting a lot of countries. I think it's misleading and misguiding a lot of educational
Could you be
activities.
more specific on that? What do you mean by misguiding, misleading, affecting people by doing what actually?
Well, by using one type of outcome to rank educational systems. I bet the Dutch system has been under pressure. I one time met, I think, your education minister, that's many years ago, and apparently Minister of Education in the Netherlands had, at least at that time, been influenced by PISA, and we judge our education system, our kids, based on this silly and stupid
Yeah.
exam systems. I think that's and the OECD has a lot of money to do it, and the governments listen to that. I would say that has distorted what education can be and should be, and it's by basically narrowing down to a few assessed and tested outcomes. There are many important things that's not being assessed, that cannot be assessed with one or two tests.
Yesterday, I interviewed Andreas Schleicher, and he informed me about what PISA is going to do in 2021, and they're going to focus much more on the so-called global competencies. So there is indeed a shift going on from cognitive output to a more skills based output. What do you know of these projects, and how do you think that these projects will influence the world? Because if education ministers are, in fact, influenced by what PISA is doing, maybe when we are focusing on global competencies, there's the shift that we are striving for.
Well, that's very naive. That's I had a debate with Andrea Schleicher last year in England, and well, whatever you try to assess, global competency, for example, cannot be assessed with a test. You can, once you assess as a test, you distort the concept. It's the same thing with creativity, problem solving. All this are contextual, and the concept is important, and but what it means, what it is very important to understand. And also, global companies, those ideas like, again, you are ultimately get into this idea about cognitive again, because a lot of times these are very much value-driven, attitudinal things. What a global citizen means in England might be very different from in America, from China, from Netherlands, and I think that's a very stupid move. I would say this, and it's going to perhaps destroy the concept. If you cherish something, never let PISA measure it. If you value something, never get OECD to do it. It's I think a lot again. It is the education ministers listen to it because it seems to be have this power over people. But that power does not mean is right. There's a lot of problems with those
Well,
things,
I
and
have a
I'm
theory. I
aware
have
of
because I think the reason why my minister is referring to PISA because it's the only way he is accountable. I mean,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
you can
Well,
say, well, the
because
PISA scores are doing great, but I can tell you, many people are striking in the Netherlands. The teachers are leaving the profession.
yeah,
Working pressure is crazy in the Netherlands, but still, the PISA scores, we're doing
yeah. Well,
fine.
like PISA makes Vietnam a good education system. I think that's stupid. Vietnam people, children suffering. They don't even have enough school facilities. Just because test scores are high, that's a good system. It actually damages a lot of education systems. So PISA, I would call the worst invention, in education of the 21st century.
Don't you think there's any country in the world that has benefited from um,
No, no.
insights generated by
No,
PISA?
I don't think any country's been. Look at England. Based on the PISA scores, they've been borrowing math from Shanghai. That has been a disaster. It hasn't improved everything, disrupted a lot of lives. It's. I recently wrote an article called, you can't copy from each other anymore, and we got to reinvent something. I think PISA, whatever Andrea Schleicher to claim, 21st century skills in all this adjustment is making, I think it's been disastrous. I think it's just somehow ignoring the fact of education is about human development. Human development cannot be summarized into one or two tests.
But you have to agree with me. PISA is part of OECD, yeah, the Organization for Economic and Cooperation. Is it
Yeah,
development? Uh, it says it all in the word economic.
yeah,
Because we, as educational systems, we want a return on investment. And how are we going to measure a return on investment if you can't measure creativity? That's ridiculous. I mean, I know, and Professor Joseph Renzulli told me, when you put a number on creativity, you're going to destroy creativity. You can't measure it by a number. I, t-
exactly. Yeah.
I totally agree, but how do you pay accountability? How are you accountable to the taxpayers?
Hold on. By the way, are you recording this or no?
I'm recording our conversation so I can
Good.
talk.
No, no, because I don't see a recording on my end. I just don't want this conversation to go wasted. Okay, just make sure it's recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there are many ways, but first of all, the issue is that even for economical development, you're trying to guess what abilities is going to drive economical development in a
Hmm.
certain country. But what drives economic development in one country is very different from what drives economic development in another country. Again, you mentioned Singapore. Again, Singapore is 5 million because it's geopolitical environment. What makes Singapore economically prosperous is different than what makes Ghana, Ethiopia, China, Brazil different. I think it's silly. The second thing is that even if you want to hold education system accountable, that's mostly an internal thing. And another part is that I think that people who can really hold educators accountable are students. If students have autonomy, if students can have more determination in their life, and that's very different. And also, who are you holding accountable, really, by the way? And most teachers get into the job, really, at least in most countries I've met, are in there because it's interesting. It's an intrinsic thing, or they have to be there. Just they have no other choices. It just and what can you do? I mean, when you hold a school accountable, what actually does that accountability mean? Do you imply teachers are unable or unwilling to teach? Do you imply that governments are unwilling to invest? I mean, they invest what they can. So I don't think a global system like this, works at all.
So that you're almost implying that you don't believe in statistic correlations, like shown by PISA or other research.
Well, not that. I think it's not so much statistics. It's really measurement. It's because in measurement we talk about one thing it's called validity and reliability. Validity basically means can you really measure what you claim to measure? For example, PISA claims to measure 21st century skills, your ability to survive and prosper 21st century. There's no evidence of that. They just claim to do it. The claim is not supported by any empirical evidence. So there's no validity. The same thing as IQ. For example, does IQ predict life? It doesn't. It just predicts your IQ. That's the thing. I think that's a lot of problems with all this measurement. It's simple validity issue. Well, it's not even goes to statistics, correlations. If you want to run correlation may be one way to check validity. If you think about if they measure anything, international tests like TIMSS and PISA should have predicted countries' rise and fall. It hasn't.
So, day before yesterday, I interviewed Charles Murray, and he wrote a very controversial book, The Bell Curve, which you know for sure. So what you're saying is what he has proven in his book, at least what he's trying to prove, is that there are correlations between IQ and wages later on, and study outcome later on.
You know why is that?
Excuse me?
You know why?
Well, what he's saying, that when you're below the mean, the chances that you're going to make a really high salary later are statistically seen as a group small.
But the real reason is that because we use IQ to select people. We use IQ to select people, and therefore we determine what education receive. And all the SAT, actually PISA is highly correlated to IQ tests. And basically, if you have higher IQ, you do well in school, and school sends you to a good university. Good university lands you to better jobs because you're selected for that. We could do the same thing with height. If we select people based on height.
There must be a correlation with height.
What?
There must be some correlation with height.
No, but if you select kids based on height and give them different education experiences, I bet height is relevant, correlated with income.
Imagine there's no PISA and we are not comparing. That would be a really interesting experiment, right? If we could say, we're at PISA, stop measuring for the next 8 years, give it some time, and let's see what happens to systems worldwide. But of course, that's not going to happen. Just like 21st century skills are never going to disappear, because you know as well as I do that P21 was designed by corporations. And what Diane Ravitch is...
But P21 is getting in trouble now as an organization. Well, I think,
they're part of a different organization now. They're not P21 anymore. But they were designed by CEOs, by CNO Roundtable, who said, we need more skilled workers. And that's why we have 21st century skills. Not because it should improve educational outcomes. So, Solutions. We've talked about problems, we talk about things that don't work. How do you look at it when you look at your own system? What do you think is a solution?
Well, I think there are many different solutions. I've been advocating, called strength-based education or personalizable education that enables students to seek and develop opportunities for themselves, self-determination. It's I think you got to come to the idea that every child, as a living organism, wants to learn, has to learn. As a human being, you cannot
Hmm.
stop learning.
I agree.
And you need to create opportunities and environments for them to pursue that learning and without prejudging them with external standards. Right now, we impose a lot of things on our children. We judge them, we evaluate them, and we try to program them. That's the wrong way. And today we have arrived at a very different time now with access to all kinds of learning opportunities, and we still pretend as if those opportunities don't exist. So we're still rushing educational opportunities to children. We judge them, and I think the solution ultimately has to go back to every individual learner, every individual child being accorded the human rights of self-determination. We support them. I think we have got into the idea of being very authoritarian to our children. We don't trust them. We don't trust, what they do. Even I think in poor families, it's if the opportunities are given and you have a chance. I mean, I was born in a very rural, very poor
Hmm.
Chinese village. I think I was lucky not to have been judged by people because they were not unable to judge me because I was in a village, and I had limited access to resources, but I was able to take advantage of that. I imagine if I kind of went to school today in China, I probably wouldn't be where I am now.
You talked about self-determination, the theory of DC and Ryan, and it has two extremes, intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And I think the motivation you're referring to is the extrinsic motivation, school systems that are pushing children to raise test scores. And you, in one of your interviews and writings, you talk about unwanted side effects. I think of this extrinsic motivation. Could you elaborate a bit more about these side effects? Because we've been looking at PISA rankings and we've been applauding Shanghai and Hong Kong for their test scores, but behind the scenes, different things are going on. Could you elaborate about that a bit?
Well, I mean, when I talk about side effects, it's really meant multiple things. But generally speaking, as in medicine, like any treatment can cure something, but has to come at some cost, some more severe than others. In education, the same. One type of education, when you achieve something, you have to come the loss. It's very simple, like logic. Just using time. If you spend a lot of time trying to make up your reading, you are not going to have the same time invested in, let's say, math or science or art, something like that. Or if you sometimes, if you what one medicine work for one person may not work for another person. So
That's
if
true.
this
Yeah.
method helps one child, it may hurt other kids. So in education, PISA's big problem or others is trying to come find a universally working approach to everybody for all education outcomes. So as evidence, I wrote in my book, What Works May Hurt, is about how, for example, the high PISA scores comes at a huge cost of social emotional well-being, creativity, diversity of talents, in China, Singapore. I mean, to a certain degree, maybe even in Finland, actually, about homogeneity of talents. And when everybody does the same thing, where do you say the diversity of talents? So but again, it wouldn't matter to Finland and Singapore as much as to other large countries. I think diversity is important. It's to understand. So that's why, by the way, educational systems should never be too big. If you run a centralized education system, if it's too large, it's always going to try to homogenize. Now, PISA is trying to homogenize global education,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a side effect. If everybody really achieves what PISA wants to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
the world is actually going to be in big trouble because we don't have a diversity of talents. We don't have the creativity that drives people.
I think they are advocating for diversity by striving for those global competencies, right? Creativity,
No, global
collaboration.
competency is another unifying concept. Is you cannot have diversity, right? If everybody does the same thing, how can you be diverse? Whenever
Well,
you have a kind of an outcome, you use that outcome to drive the investment of education resources to select individuals, and by selecting, you're excluding, in essence. So you are driving, homogenization.
but these measurements are not going to end. That's one sure thing. We have to be realistic. So, to my opinion, we
Well,
have.
I'm not sure if I don't agree with your kind of pessimistic view. I think they may not end unless we act. If people began act, if people like you and like me who don't believe it, and we can resist it, we can reject it. It's I do see actually a sign of being rejected. For example, global competency is not nearly getting as much acceptance as others. PISA's main thing is still their three subjects, and the baby PISA, the PISA for 5 year olds, are not being accepted, endorsed as well as others. I do think people are going to have a PISA fatigue sometime, and but if the more we expose these problems, the more people are likely going to reject it. So anything that's created by human being can be undone by human beings. So I'm much more kind of optimistic, but it requires us to act.
Diane Ravitch told me the same thing. She said, "Well, you're a blogger, right?" And she's blogging, and she reaches millions, tens of millions of people by blogging about education, by just using her 10 fingers. That's amazing. But you have to admit it's it's a tough battle. I mean, because you're always dealing with a layer of people in education in ministries that don't know what they're talking about. Talking of which, um, what has been the influence of the Trump administration and the Betsy DeVos regime on education? What has it done to education?
Well, I mean, I think it, honestly, they haven't done much because Trump has caused so many troubles on different fronts. I think education perhaps is the least bother. I think the big agenda of Diane of Betsy DeVos, Diane Ravitch might have told you this, is on privatization,
Hmm.
is on
Charter
that
schools.
agenda, and yeah, but it's that is definitely a dangerous agenda, but that's not new, and so but they have not really been big on accountability, on testing. That they have not had time. Spacing has been very ineffective, and which is good. An ineffective government, which is really good for education.
One of the question it's a bit it's got to do with the question of fighting back. And I interviewed Edie Hirsch last year,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have a Twitter account, and he doesn't have a Facebook account. He doesn't have any account when it comes to social media, and yet he has some brilliant ideas, and he has written some brilliant books, and he's trying to save children from failed educational theories. But as you know, many false theories enter education through the massive social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. How do you make sure, Professor Zhao, that your heritage or your thoughts reach a big amount of people?
Well, I mean, I think there are different ways of doing this. One is that you have to write accessible, readings, and I write for academics and for teachers and the parents, and so I publish books, publish articles. I go around, give presentations and do workshops. I work with schools. I work with kids. I have a Twitter account. I have a blog site, but my blog site is not nearly as popular as Diane's because I most of my writing is really about essays. I write blogs very infrequently. I just want to make sure I have a longer writings, all those things. So yeah, I try to reach to different kind of people, but at the same time, scholars are not necessarily like kind of public, we're not really like public faces, and so our reach is always limited because I think there are different roles of different people. Some people are really good at reaching the public, they're enthusiastic. Sometimes scholars have to be also independent, in many ways
Hmm.
objective. So I know this is political, education is ultimately political, but I am not willing to be aligned with any political alliance, political party, political beliefs, because I think that's independent. Because any one government can come in and can go. I mean, like in Netherlands, you have left wing, right wing. I think so. I also try to maintain certain kind of objectivity.
Just like me, you came a long way literally. I was born in Indonesia like 38 years ago, and I was adopted by Dutch parents. And I
Okay.
grew up in a middle class family, white middle class family. I went to a middle class school. I had the luxury of studying flamenco guitar, a totally useless profession in society. But you have an amazing story as well. I mean, to from riding a water buffalo to where you are now. Um, could you elaborate a bit on that? How did you get where you are now?
Well, it seems to me, I don't know about you, but life. People ask me, so how did you choose to do certain things? I don't really feel like I had the luxury to choose. I think most of my life is somehow compelled by myself or by others. I'm not always conscious in terms of, well, what's my next step? How would I move? I'm kind of passively responded to what life has arranged for me. So in that regard, from the rural countryside to school. But one thing I think is clear is I've always had this optimism in what I can do. In the sense that I kind of refuse to be defined by status quo or by authority. I always feel like I can, no matter where I am, whatever kind of narrow space you
Hmm.
have, everybody can do something. If they believe in it. So that's when I think it's what I believe. It's not what so much I've chosen the big events in my life. I never had the luxury to choose the big event in my life, because you are so poor, you don't have the resources to make those choices. So that however, what I did, I think, is in retrospect, is really very much of responding to every event positively. I mean, that's why I believe no matter where you are, who you are, and what condition you are, if you have a strong belief, if you're willing to work hard, you really truly can make smaller changes. And that change may or may not result in big changes, but definitely it's better than accepting it.
And how important was your direct environment? I mean, your parents. In what way did they encourage you to become who you are now?
Well, uh, I think they didn't stop me. That's the big thing. I don't think my parents were very supportive of what I was trying to do. They did not define me. They did not say you should do this, do that. They basically accepted me, which is very unusual for Chinese poor illiterate parents. But they did that. I'm very grateful. But also, I look at how my father was able to raise five children in a
Wow.
very poor environment, and how he could keep us alive. Just that's amazing. And he was very entrepreneurial, creative, and positive. I think that's he was always trying to find different ways to deal with the system, because during cultural revolution that was disastrous time.
Yeah.
But somehow he managed it. I think I learned that from him. And again, a lot of this is not so much of explicit. I don't remember him explicit telling me you got
Hmm.
to be positive, you got to do this. I just think of
Just
him.
setting the
Just
good example, maybe. Just setting the good example of showing how
I
it's
think so.
done.
I think so.
But you
But I
said,
left home really early. I think I went to boarding school when I was really like 13. So most of my adult life I did not get to spend with my father all the time.
so your Chinese background, how has it influenced the way you look at education in the United States? Do you have different perspective than your peers, for example?
Well, I think tremendously. I think my Chinese education background and my Chinese culture background has helped me to see how a lot of the misperceptions of Americans of Asian education. I think they did not understand the deep meaning. That's I've been critical of Andrea Schleicher and PISA for glorifying the miseries of other people. I mean, they're trying to glorify the education system in China, in Korea, in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
It's a misery. A lot of kids have miserable experience, but they glorify that as, oh, they work hard. They are trying to be persistent. So it allowed me to see through a lot of the half-baked half-truth they've been trying to project in, for me. Another part is really, I think my Chinese culture also allows me to see, to appreciate, especially my cross-cultural background, to see how culturally, how education is culturally rooted. You cannot really easily uproot and borrow and practice from one culture to another culture.
So let's move the last part of the interview. I want to talk about the future of education, where we could go as a system. I was wondering, what is your signature, by the way? Because every scholar has a signature. I propose to you the question that many people talk about 21st century skills. Michael Fullan talks about the 6 C's. I talked to Tony Wagner about his 7 survival skills. What is your signature? How do you see what's most necessary?
Well, I think that for me, it's I say that what the future will be. I don't agree with any of those prescriptions. I don't believe any one set of prescription works for all children in all cultures for
Mm-hmm.
all jobs. I don't. That's why I reject the 4 C's, 6 C's, 9 skills. Those may be nice things to drive policymakers to say, yeah, let's have a core. Everybody should do the same thing. I'm not sure. Okay, so conceptually maybe, but you need to ask the question: how much? How much creativity, how much collaboration? There's a lot of this. So I'm a believer of a jagged profile. I think every individual has strength and has weaknesses, but out of that, the strength and weaknesses you need to combine with passion, and everybody needs to be entrepreneurial and creative. And entrepreneurial and creative means creating value for others. So for me, is if everybody can be uniquely great in what they do, what they can do, and passionate about what they can do, and turn their unique passion and strength into value for other people, that's called entrepreneurial thinking, we are probably okay. So that's why I
Yep.
think education is not about imposing the same thing on everybody, but allow every individual to become uniquely great, in their own way. But keep in mind, they need to be doing what they can do, and interested in what they do, but also in what they do is to create value for other people.
The thing is, it sounds great, and I can tell you, every one of my students, I teach in secondary school, and I teach the lower level, IQs 70 between 85. They would all agree. The thing is, how do you facilitate that? I always say, practice what you preach, and you're a professor. So when I would talk to your students, would they agree with? Would they say that you approach them, you foster their creativity, you foster their creative thinking? Um, how do you do it?
You probably will find that, and a lot of my students think I'm actually too relaxed. I don't give them too much structure. Just give example. I'm teaching a group of educators in a doctor program course. And first of all, I tell them everybody gets A's. Don't worry about the A. That removes the extrinsic motivation. Second thing in this course, try to think how this course would help you become who you are and achieve what you can do. So any projects you do has to be authentic and meaningful to you, in this work. And third, in teaching the course, I give them the content, a list of content they could cover. So I would say about 1/3 of the content we must do everybody, and another
Mm-hmm.
third will be voted by the whole class what we should study, and another possible third or fourth will be determined by individuals by what you think is meaningful to you. So that's how I teach. So and but a big thing is that in my teaching, is always about producing authentic product. And through creating that product, be it a book, an article, a research project, or a video, and every individual plays a role in that differently, not trying to be the same. Like collaborative learning, for example, focus too much on collaborative skills. Actually, good collaboration is really about creating value for each other. Use your strength to help others and allow others to help you with your weakness.
So, and the entrance exam to Kansas University, does it require any creativity or collaboration or critical thinking?
I think that there's, I don't know if you know the U.S. education admission system.
The
They
SATs.
well, it's SAT is just one factor, or test scores is one, but they also look at your GPS, your
Hmm.
recommendation letters, your other extracurricular activities, and so they look at broadly. Uh, I'm sure SAT plays a role, but I think different admissions officers are looking for evidence of other abilities like creativity, like participation, community engagement, creating value for others. And at least, recently, I think a report came out of Harvard called "Turning the Tide," is encouraging college admissions to reward or use college admissions to have students to be more service minded. So that's it's not perfect. I think it's not completely relying on SAT.
Charles Murray told me the bachelor system is completely obsolete. There are much better ways to assess what somebody knows and what somebody's skills are. How do you see that topic?
Well, yeah, it is. I think it's definitely outdated. It's there is efforts to do that. Actually, there's a consortium called Mastery Transcripts Consortium in the U.S. of over 200 schools now. They are trying to reinvent what a transcript can look like, high school transcript, to be more individualized, to be more about competencies than test scores, to be more about cross-disciplinary competencies than subject matter knowledge. So there is a movement to do that.
We are moving towards the end, and it's my question about the major global problems. And one of them, I mean, last week a report was released that 1 million animals are about to become extinct in the near future. So, environmental issues are one of the global issues we all face. Are there any other issues that we face as humankind that should be addressed in education?
Well, there are many issues. I think human beings are the biggest issue. We xenophobia is a big problem. I think xenophobia
Migration.
that's just really big. It's I mean, you see the rise of xenophobia, nationalism, tribalism. I mean, even in the Netherlands, you look at Brexit, look at Trump, look at trade wars. I think human beings are still confined by this imagined country lines, nations,
Hmm.
this country versus that country, my religion against your religion. That is actually the humanity is the biggest issue. Is what is humanity? I think we are still like animals. That's why education has really failed in many parts. I mean, Trump is a good example of how education has failed. So is Brexit. So is all this massacre. Look at people shooting each other. Look at the what happened in Sri Lanka. What happened in New Zealand. What happened today? Actually, yesterday in Denver, Colorado. All these attacks, these bombings. We spend a lot more money trying to kill each other than trying to help each other. Look at if we could disarm, honestly, if nobody spent any money on military weapons or killing each other or defending so-called defending ourselves against others, we probably might have a much better society, human society. I mean, so that's actually the big problem nobody pays attention to. But also, you can see the issue is that so much about there are crazy people who like to do it, but after enlightenment, after modern education, there's so many people who are so-called educated people who at least went to school are still believing in a time of crusade, of really medieval age beliefs. Even before that, so this is actually the saddest thing, worse actually, more dangerous than actually environments. But people don't talk about this stuff. It's we're talking about economic competitiveness. That's another problem with OECD, PISA. They're trying to global competitiveness. What are you competing against? You look at all the developed countries. A small percentage of people taking so much resource for others. Why do we want more? What we know, and also it's not going to make you happier. You remember that's think about Maslow. Think of you talk about Ryan and Deci. Think about all this positive psychology. What makes you happy is to create value for others. I'm not sure Trump is a happy person. Look, I mean, he's miserable. Just so anyway. So I think that's the big problem on humanity. It's I really say human beings are the only ones going to destroy themselves. Basically, we don't need to wait for a meter, or we don't need to wait for anything else.
We didn't mention the word technology. What about technology?
Well, that's another thing that's about technology. That's another tool we use to destroy ourselves. Basically. So I think unless we have some way to understand technology, appreciate what technology is and can do. Remember, nuclear weapons is a technology. Not only about ICTs. I mean, actually, I look at ICT, artificial intelligence. Internet of things. These are actually great weapons. They're going to be weaponized someday. They have been weaponized. Imagine you're driving a Tesla or other automatic driving cars. Someone locks your IP. Someone now can send a virus into your electric grid, and others can poison people through the water mains. Imagine all your cameras, any of this little device with IP in your house, your smart elevator, smart refrigerator, smart microwave. They're all can be weaponized to attack people. Now, this is actually a very dangerous time, but the only thing we can do is people become more rational. People understand interdependence. That's why Andreas, the whole thing about PISA's global companies, they're not going to get to this issue. They're not going to get to this idea about interdependence, about interconnectedness. But that's really something we need to understand.
Yeah, I talked to Professor Senge, Peter Senge, and he's really advocates for system thinking. I think that's today is the most important period in humankind to start doing systems thinking. So addressing all these problems is one thing, but where do you start in education? We have technology, we have sustainability, and we have xenophobia. How do we contribute to a solution in education? Of course, we can't solve everything, but we can start. We can do something.
Well, we need to return to the idea. We need to talk about education, not schooling. I think right now, all the conversation is about schooling. How do you make schooling effective? How do you make schooling efficient? That's often measured by how well you're imposing the same knowledge skills on all people. Education is really about development of individuals, of every human potential. So I don't think there is a systematic solution. We cannot look at the government. I think ultimately education has to rely on individuals like you and me, like individual students, like parents. I think this is the grassroots time. Instead of looking for a great leader, which often leads to tyranny. You think about World War I, World War II. The world now, in a time of crisis, human beings have the tendency to wait for God to arrive. And that's why we got all this strongman. Look at the strongman is destroying the global environment. Look at every country, right? You got Trump, you got Maduro, and you got Erdogan. You get all these crazy people managing the whole world, and that's what we need to avoid in education.
Well, I think the world leaders are not going to solve the global issue. It's you and me in the end.
Yeah.
And that's why Pasi Salberg told me that his hero, who's your hero? I always ask people, was Greta Thunberg, the little girl from Sweden who started striking from school for a better climate. And those initiatives are really hopeful, in my opinion. Do you see things like that happening in the United States, and awareness amongst?
Well, it's happening. You have young girls go out to protest test scores. School board. Because I've been watching kids from many different countries taking initiatives on their own.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of examples of that. I think but it's not enough. It's not enough. It's that the systems works against individuals. We're trying to do that.
I have two more questions. One is,
Yes.
how do you look at the Dutch system? If you think of Holland, you've visited Holland a couple of times. And the last question is, what are you researching at the moment? What are you trying to find answers for?
Well, I cannot claim to know the Dutch system very well, but I did have interactions with teachers, with school leaders through my conversations with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't claim to know too much about it. It's
what are the first things that come to mind?
What's that?
What are the first things that come to mind when you think of Dutch education?
Well, I mean, I think you are more relaxed than some other countries, and you are not as crazily and seduced by PISA results, maybe because you do well. And often Dutch people are generally tolerant of diversity. I think that's very important in the education system. And so that's what I come to mind, in the tolerance of people. What I'm doing research on now, I'm really research a lot on side effects. Whenever I see some popular idea popping out,
Mm-hmm.
like visible learning or stuff like that, I said, maybe not. I need to look at what I'm trying to reject the idea of calling, a solution for all. I get a lot of emails from people saying, I have the solution for the global education system. I said, no, as long as it's one solution for all, it won't work. Because for me, I'm really also focused on really the individual, the students, the individual human beings who have control on their own. I just think I work on a book called Learners Without Borders, talk about self-determination. I think it's really important to think about. Another thing is just really trying to push the idea like John Dewey. Remember, education really is not in preparation for life. Kids spending 12 years, 13 years in our school, that's their life. We should treat them nicely, not because they're here, we torture them so they can have a better life in the future. That's just a misperception.
Great. I always ask my interviewees, who inspires you? Who could I interview next? Who do you admire in your field or maybe outside of the field?
Well, I think you've done a great job. You've interviewed a lot of people. I would recommend maybe another person to talk to is David Berliner. Do you know David Berliner?
Yeah, from the psychology department.
At Arizona State University, is a distinguished professor. He is a very wise man. You should talk to him, definitely.
Great. Well, this was a really interesting conversation. I would like to finish this conversation by thanking you for your time.
Thank you.
And let's join forces in doing the right thing. And the right thing takes time, and we need to assess everything we do, and we need to think twice before we say this is the right intervention. So that's what I've learned from you. I mean, you just mentioned very briefly, well, visible learning, I don't know. I mean, John Hattie is a holy person. You don't question him because, I mean, he's John Hattie. And you just say, well, that's almost crazy in the ears of some people. So I'm glad.
Well, if you go read my book, there's a chapter dealing with visible learning, why it has side effects. It doesn't help.
Great. So at least when it comes to, you inspire me when it comes to critical thinking, defying the system. So thank you for that. Keep on working. Great. And when you come to Holland, I will surely visit one of your presentations or talks.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Take care. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Could you send me a high resolution photo that I can use in my article?
You can probably get on my website. Just download the one from website.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good luck.
Bye bye.
Lovely talking to you. Bye bye.
Bye.